happened? I was muted. Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, I'm still muted. Okay, I'm on. Good afternoon. It is Tuesday, the 27th of July, and we are studying the Tractate of Talmud for the first time in a while. The folks that are joining are not on Zoom, but we're using other ways of connecting. So Lynn, it's great to have you by phone. Gedalia, it's good to have you in studio. I don't know why we can't see you, but Gedalia is with.
Problem.
Here we gotta get rid of the virtual background because I want to be able to see you. There we go.
Oh,
And
okay.
finally, today is a very monumental occasion in the story of Joshua and in our journey through the Bible. We're not going to finish the book of Joshua, although we're getting close. But we're studying the story of Joshua. Joshua was the student, disciple of Moses, who led the Israelites into Israel, helped the Jewish people conquer and settle the land. That part of the story, the settling of the land, is obviously a very important narrative. Why is it so important? Well, it certainly was important to a Jew living in Israel to appreciate the story of how they came to be where they are, right? And why the tribes are distributed and divided. I don't mean divided, but they're distributed and laid across the land of Israel. So if you're a young child living in Israel 2,600 years ago and living in the land of Benjamin, you might say, hey, Dad, why are we in Benjamin? And you might say, hey, did you remember when we were studying the book of Joshua? Because this is the land that we got when Joshua settled the land, and so on and so forth. Now, even today, where a majority, well, actually, it's almost not, but for the last 2,000 years, since the fall of Jerusalem, and the Jews were sent into exile, a majority of the Israelites, the Jewish people, did not live in Israel. We lived in the diaspora across the globe. Still, the land of Israel was always a very, very important part of our identity, of what was important to us. And a Jew in the diaspora, in exile, suffering at the hands of whoever, Spanish, the Turkish, the English, anybody else that exists, the Germans, of course, the Russians, the Cossacks, the Poles, whatever it was, life was not always great for a Jew, but they always knew that there's the land of Israel, and there's a place that we belong, we have a place that's home, and it's not here. And so even though thankfully, today in America, we're very blessed, but a Jew always needs to remember, our connection to Israel, to our land, to our people, and our story. And that's what the book of Joshua fills us in, the story of our land, of our people. And there are a lot of lessons in this, many important stories we've read, but the geography was also important to know Israel, who went where, what the cities were the Levites. But now finally, Israel's been distributed. It's been settled. The tribes all have their places. It's not perfect. There's more to this story. But now we're going to talk about what happens when everybody goes home. So it's kind of, in a sense, like the end of a season where everybody's going home. And let's see what happens next. So we're going to share the screen. Chapter 22 of Joshua. Actually, I'm going to, how do I name? All right, we'll take care of that later. So here we are, chapter 22. It's on the screen. And I'm going to read it, so even if you don't have a screen, you can hear what's going on. And let's also make the text bigger. Why not? We can afford to do that. All right, so then, what's then? After all the Jews found their land, then after all the Levites and the Kohanes had their cities, and all the tribes had their tribal estates and territory, and now they have their work set out before them to discover, develop, and become proficient in the local industry. Because as we know, Israel has very diverse climates, very diverse soil types, very diverse industry. And so all of the different tribes have to become familiar. Those that were planting olive groves, planting, maintaining, collecting, pressing, marketing the oil, others with wine. Some were fishing, others trade. So all the tribes have to acclimate to their area, discover its resources, and nothing happens overnight. But now, here is the story. Then Joshua summoned the Reubenites, that's the tribe of Reuben, the Gadites, the tribe of Gad, and half of the tribe of Manasseh. And he said to them, congratulations, you've observed all that Moses, servant of God, commanded you. You've obeyed me in everything that I've commanded you. Job well done. What more? You have not forsaken your kinsmen through the long years down to this day. Because for many years, as the Jews are conquering the land, those tribes, their families were settled, but they fought, protected, defended, and settled the land along with the rest of their brothers in Israel. And now the Lord your God has given your kinsmen rest, as he promised them. Therefore, turn, go to your homes, to the land of your holdings, beyond the Jordan that Moses, the servant of the Lord, assigned to you. So recall, Israel, west of the Jordan. East of the Jordan were territories conquered by the Israelites when attacked. So the Israelites didn't seek those conquests, but they were attacked and they fought back effectively, we might add. And now the Israelites controlled vast holdings east of the Jordan, the area that today is the country of Jordan. And although the land of Israel is meant to be west of the Jordan, 2.5 tribes were granted permission to settle there, and they did. But the warriors had to go across the Jordan, help the Jews settle, and now it's time for them to go home. Go back to your families. But be very careful, because until now, they are connected to the main center of Judaism. They're traveling alongside Joshua, the teacher of the Torah. And so now he's going to say, you guys are going to be a little distant, be a little further away. So be careful to fulfill the instructions and the teachings, the Torah that Moshe, servant of the Lord, enjoined you. What are those commandments? Besides for the whole Bible specifically, to love the Lord your God, walk in all of his ways, and keep his commandments. Hold fast to him. Serve him with all your heart and soul. This is a very important verse. This should be like a bumper sticker. You should highlight it, right, and cut it out. What does a Jew got to do? Joshua says, fulfill the instructions and the teachings of Moses that he enjoined you. Love the Lord your God, go in his ways, keep his command. All you got to do is love him, go in his ways, keep all the commandments, and serve him with your heart and soul. It's a lot, but it's all summarized in one verse. And that's what he tells them. Then Joshua blessed them, dismissed them, and they went to their homes at last. Could you imagine? You haven't seen your family in 14 years.
Wow.
That's a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
They must have been very excited to go home. Where do they go? Well, each of the tribes split up. To the 1/2 tribe of Menashe, Moses assigned territory in Bashan, which was, by the way, to the north. To the other, Joshua assigned territory on the west side of the Jordan and their kinsmen. Furthermore, when Joshua sent them off to their homes, he blessed them. So they made a big sacrifice, but they're going to get some nice things in return. He said to them, hey guys, before you go home, return to your home with great wealth. Make sure you bring a present home. Make sure your families are going to be happy that you were gone for so long. Bring a lot of livestock, silver, gold, copper, iron, and a great quantity of clothing. Stop off at the mall. Share the spoils of your enemies with your kinsmen. So make sure to bring back a lot of nice stuff. And so the Reubenites, the Gadites, half the tribe of Menashe left the Israelites at Shiloh, which was pretty close to the Jordan River, right? And they went to the land of their own holding, which they had acquired by the command of the Lord through Moses. So at long last, they're done fighting. Joshua tells them they can go. They take great wealth that they found during the conquest of Israel, and they head home. And that should be the end of the story. But as you know, there's always another season. There's always got to be, right? You need it. And so there always is more lessons to be learned, more drama, more trauma, and that's what happened next. When they came to the region of the Jordan, in the land of Canaan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Menashe built an altar there by the Jordan, a great, conspicuous altar. Now, what do you do with an altar?
You sacrifice.
You sacrifice, you offer, you worship. So it probably came with great devotion to God. They wanted to worship God. But the Israelites were unhappy with this development. They felt that they were trying to create an independent economy, an independent society that's detached from the rest of Israel. Perhaps they want to create their own way of life, which would be okay, except for they're Jewish and they need to stay connected to the Jewish people. So let's see what happens. A report reached the Israelites. What was the report? They got a dispatch. They got a intelligence. Someone sent a note. You'll never believe what I saw. And it said as follows: the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half tribe of Manasseh have built an altar opposite the land of Canaan in the Jordan region across from the Israelites. When the Israelites heard this, so they're basically creating their own religious center. Where is the center of Jewish religion?
Shiloh.
Shiloh. So if they want to bring an offering, they should have to go to Shiloh. Are they trying to create their own temple, their own center? And so the Israelites heard this. The whole community of the Israelites assembled at Shiloh to put an end to this, even if it meant war.
War and fighting their own people.
Even if it meant war, they were going to defend this if they needed to. Not that they wanted to go to war, but they are willing to go to war. And they felt that this is a kind of problem that needs to be nipped at the bud, to stop it right in the beginning before it develops into something much more painful. And that's their response.
So they could not settle it any other way besides.
Oh, we'll see. We'll see. It ends up being settled. We'll see. But they were ready to respond however possible, even war, which is obviously hard to hear. So, but we'll see. It's, this is a good lesson in when someone does something wrong. Many times we have an instinct. We assume the worst intentions in our friend. And sometimes those worst intentions are true. But many times the person that's wronging us doesn't even realize that they're hurting or they're doing something that's offensive. Maybe they see things differently, or maybe they're not as in tune to the sentiment or the emotions involved. And so let's see what happens. So the Israelites first decide to send an agent to speak to them, to find out what's really going on. So who are you going to send? You need to send the most expert agent that's adept at the art of espionage and diplomacy and war and the matters of the spirit. Well, there's one man more qualified than any other. And it's someone we've met before. Lynn, Gedalia sees the screen here, but you want to take a guess who we might be talking about?
You're not talking about Joshua?
No, we're not talking about Joshua.
Talking about somebody else?
Somebody else. I'm going to say his name, and then you're going to say, of course.
No, that's not me.
not you. So the Israelites sent a priest called Pinchas. Pinchas, son of Elazar. He is the guy who was one of the spies sent to scout out Israel by Joshua. He knows intrigue. He knows tactics of war. He was, I guess so. He was, you have keys? Yeah. He was the one who also acted swiftly when there was misconduct. He was a priest. He has all the qualifications of someone who can assess and aspire for peace, but also be quite forceful when necessary. And so he was selected. Pinchas, son of Elazar, was sent across the Jordan to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half of the tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead or Gilad. He didn't travel alone. He took 10 very important folks. He was accompanied by 10 chieftains, one chieftain from each tribe of Israel that lived on the mainland of Israel. They were, every one of them, heads of ancestral houses of the contingents of Israel. So each of the tribes send folks to go confront and address the issue of the construction of a tabernacle and an attempt to create an independent spiritual ecosystem. So when they came to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh in the land of Gilead, they spoke to them as follows. They present words, not of their own words, but words of all of the people of Israel. Ko Amar, thus states Kol Adat Hashem, the whole community of Israel. What is this treachery that you've committed this day against the God of Israel, turning away from the Lord, building yourself an altar, and rebelling this day against the Lord? They saw this as rebellion. They saw this as rebellion. So the interesting thing, why was this seen as a rebellion? Well, in the time of the desert, when the Jews were wandering, offerings were brought primarily in the tabernacle. And now they want offerings to be brought primarily in the tabernacle in Shiloh. And so this is considered a rebellion. The speech, the message doesn't stop there. They started giving a long list, a reminder of different times where the Israelites fell short of the ideal, and it cost all of Israel. It was painful. And this is part of their speaking, part of this conversation, reminding the Israel of these tribes that it's not worth messing with God. Is the sin of Peor, which brought a plague upon the community of Israel, such a small thing to us, when the Jews worshipped idols and a plague broke out in the desert? Don't you remember that? We still carry the trauma of that event. We still have not cleansed ourselves from it to this day. We're still not over the trauma of losing so many in a plague by worshiping other gods, and the spiritual cost. And now you turn away from the Lord again. If you rebel against the Lord today, tomorrow, he'll be angry at the whole community of Israel. So then we were wondering, why were the Jews so offended? Okay, so two tribes are messing around. What is it, the business of the other tribes? But the Jewish people understood an important truth, which is that our destiny is common. We have a common destiny. And even if it's just a minority that are messing up or messing around, this could be costly for all of Israel. If it is, so now they want to also get into the minds of these tribes. If it's because the land of your holdings is unclean, maybe you feel like you're not in a place that's worthy of, not as worthy. So cross over into the land of the Lord's own holding. All you got to do is cross the river where the tabernacle of the Lord abides, and acquire your holdings among us. If there's something making you feel uncomfortable or detached about the real estate on the east of the Jordan, well, then we will let you acquire land closer to Israel. If the distance is making you feel removed, but don't rebel against the Lord. Don't rebel against us by building an altar for yourself instead of the altar of the Lord our God, which was the altar in Shiloh. So again, they're saying, listen, understand why we take this so seriously. You're placing us in jeopardy. Now, we understand there might be factors that are causing you angst or discomfort. Let's talk about it. Let's find a solution. Maybe you feel distant spiritually. Well, okay, we can try to help you settle in Israel. We'll find you land. We'll find you holdings. Don't rebel against God. Don't make your own altar that's not the one that God wants us to do. Then they're not done yet. They're pressing all the buttons to try to make them feel guilty. When Achan, son of Zerah, violated the prescription, I don't remember the story, back in the beginning of Joshua, the Israelites were told not to take anything from Jordan. Not from Jordan, from Jericho, when Jericho fell. And one guy, Achan, took some stuff. And because of that small sin of one man, the whole battle was lost. The next battle was lost. Anger struck the whole community of Israel. He wasn't the only one to perish for that sin. So they're reminding these 2.5 tribes that our common destiny ties us together whether we like it or not. Therefore, you must cease and desist all altar activity. So what are the Reubenites and the Gadites going to respond? Is it going to be, let's go to battle? Will they defend themselves? Will they apologize? Well, that's what's coming next. Verse 21, chapter 22 of Joshua. The Reubenites, the Gadites, the half-tribe of Manasseh replied to the heads of the contingent of Israel, and they said, God, the Lord, God. Look at this. There's no verse, to my knowledge, that has so many times the word of God in one Continuous. Kel Elokim Hashem, Kel Elokim Hashem. God, Lord of God, God, the Lord, God, He knows. And Israel too shall know. If we acted in rebellion or in treachery against the Lord, do not vindicate us this day. In other words, what they're saying in a more poetic way is God knows, and you must know too, that what we've done here is not at all rebellion, not against the people, not against God. If we built an altar to turn away from the Lord, if it was to offer burnt offerings or meal offerings or to present sacrifices of well-being upon it, may the Lord himself demand a reckoning. We did this thing only out of concern. At a time to come, your children might say to our children, what have you got to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? The Lord had made the Jordan a boundary between us, and Reubenites, Gadites, you are cut off. Thus, your children might one day prevent our children from worshiping. So we decided to provide a witness for ourselves by building an altar, not for offerings, but just as a sign between you and us for the generations to come, that we are allowed to perform the service of the Lord before him with our offerings, and that your children should never tell our children you have no share in the Lord. He reasoned, should they speak thus to us and to our children in time to come, we'll say, you see this replica which our fathers made? It wasn't for offerings. It was to remind you that we're meant to be connected. So this is a very clever and sincere sounding response. They said, you guys have misjudged us. You think we're trying to create our own independent altar? Not at all. But we wanted to have this conversation. Made you look. We got your attention. And we're anxious. Because as much as today we feel like we're one nation, you know what happens? Let me put it this way, Lynn, and I, we're all, people that grow up, and many people in America, Jewish people, didn't have this luxury. But families that grow up with cousins, many times first cousins could be quite close, if you grew up in the same area. Second cousins could also be close. Third cousins a little more distant, but at a certain point you stop counting. And that's because the passage of time, generations continue, and eventually there's a greater and greater distance between a single family, because the descendants of that family build their own families. And so we could imagine here a scenario where they've freshly separated, and there's not a great distance, just a river, but they know that they're more away from the center of Jewish activity than their brothers and sisters. And so they're trying to create a sign, something that's going to always be part of the dialogue, the narrative. And they want the Jews west of the Jordan to be able to see the altar too. And that collectively, this will be a reminder that there was once some drama about this altar. And really, we are all part of the same people. And therefore, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half of the tribe of Manasseh can never be pushed away, rejected, or disallowed from crossing the Jordan and worshiping like every other Jew. And so this is a very sincere, profound statement and an expression of anxiety that they carried. And so this story, besides for the response, which is a very powerful one, is a reminder of some slight vulnerability and some foresight about how a small fissure today could be something massive down the road. And so they want to preemptively create a safeguard to keep their descendants from being removed, cut out, or pushed away from the rest of the people of Israel. And so this is a very powerful and important consideration. And then they said, far be it from us to rebel against the Lord, to turn away from the Lord, to build an altar, other than the altar of the Lord our God, which stands before his tabernacle. All we want to do is worship where all Jews worship, in Shiloh, for now. So let's see, did Pinchas and all of the chieftains accept this explanation? Do they think it was an excuse? So when the priest Pinchas and the princes, the chieftains of the community, heard this explanation, who were with him, heard this explanation given by the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the Manassites, they approved. They accepted. So did they need to go to battle? Not at all.
No.
On the
I have a question.
Yes.
Originally, when they did they choose that land Or did Joshua pick that land for them?
They chose the land. They chose the land. They chose the land.
What? They chose the land.
They chose. They asked permission and God approved. Moses approved.
Okay.
So they initiated it. So it's not like they're being forced to be at this extra distance. They chose it. But ultimately, they're being mindful of the fact that there might be some distance, and they want to avoid it at all costs. And I think this is a beautiful, poignant story. And it conjures and conveys a lot of emotion and love and connection and concern. Parents always think about their children, their grandchildren, and future generations. And it's beautiful to see this consideration unfolding before our eyes here at the very beginning of the Jewish people living in this region. I should say, well, the second time, right? Abraham lived there and Isaac lived there, but now they're returning home. And so the priest, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, said to the Reubenites, the Gadites, the Manassites, now we know the Lord is in our midst. Since you have not committed such treachery against the Lord, you have indeed saved the Israelites from punishment by the Lord. How did they save the Jews from punishment? Let's see.
But at the time that they chose that land, they had no idea where the temple was going to be.
Well, they probably knew the temple was not going to be. They knew it was not going to be where they were camping. If anything, the temple ultimately is a pretty good and close proximity. It's closer to them than they imagined. Because let's say Jerusalem, if you look at a map, is a greater distance than Shiloh. Shiloh is closer to the Jordan. And so ultimately, the present, at the time of this narrative, the center of Israel, the tabernacle, is not that far from the Jordan. But they were wise to be concerned because eventually the temple moves to Jerusalem. And that's a good bit further from the Jordan. And so they were very wise and thoughtful and insightful to have this concern, to make this monument, and to force this conversation.
I'm here.
Welcome, Lynn. Welcome on.
So you can get your phone.
All right, so we're gonna hang up now because we're getting.
Yeah.
All right, Lynn. Welcome home.
Thank you, Rabbi, for letting me share in this.
Well, thank you for joining us.
Hi. Yeah, my computer was upgrading. Sorry.
Well, Mazel Tov. And Lynn, I just want to say something.
Yeah.
In the past, the summer meant for me that we wouldn't have a chance to
I know.
get together. And so this
I
is the
know.
blessing of Zoom that
This
we're
is
able to
good.
continue
Yeah.
connecting.
Yeah.
So thank you for being on.
I'm not missing.
No?
Yeah.
And so the Pinchas, Phineas, and the leaders have the humility and the clarity to accept the explanation and to give them kudos for it.
Good.
And so then the priest, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, and the chieftains, I feel bad, by the way, for everyone that's missing today, because this is I think a really beautiful and nice story. Then the priest, Pinchas, son of Eleazar, and the chieftains returned from the Reubenites, from the Gadites, in the land of the Gilead, to the Israelites in the land of Canaan, and gave the report. The Israelites as a whole were pleased, and the Israelites gave praise to God, and they spoke no more of going to war against them and to ravage the lands in which the Reubenites and the Gadites dwelt.
Okay, I have a question, Rabbi.
Yes,
I know
please.
this may sound silly, but
Never silly.
in modern day times, we have separate temples and separate places to worship God. Okay, when did this happen? I mean, you're talking now about one place and people traveling to the one place to worship, okay, on special holidays. But when did this all come into being that we were able to have temples?
This is a brilliant question and a very educated and insightful question. So as usual, there's no need to apologize. I'm happy you asked that question.
Well,
so it's a good question. It really is a good question. It turns out there are two types of temples, two types of houses of worship. There was the temple, which was in Shiloh, and then in Jerusalem. And it is that temple where that was the center of the Jewish universe.
Mm-hmm.
That's where offerings were brought, and the high priest was, and the leadership, and that could not have a replica.
Mm-hmm.
But starting primarily in the Second Temple era,
Uh-huh.
also a little bit in between when the first temple fell, and Jewish people are dispersed across the known world, which was a little smaller than the world today. But you had Jews in Egypt and in Iraq and in Syria and in Turkey and even eventually in Spain. Jews have been in Spain for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
So then they started having a place called a Beit Knesset, or in Aramaic, a Beit Kenishta, a place of gathering.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where Jewish people across the diaspora primarily, but eventually in Israel too, would gather together more frequently to pray, to connect, to
Mm-hmm.
socialize, but not to bring offerings. And so, Lynn, to answer to your question, which again
Yeah,
is a
but did they
brilliant
have
one.
Torah there, or
So
was
they would
the
have a Torah.
They didn't?
They would have Torahs in these
Oh, they had Torahs. In other
houses
words,
of gathering.
okay.
Initially, I don't know if they had to have a Torah, but I think they had Torahs. But the
Mhm.
point was, it was a place for Jews to gather and pray, but it wasn't a replacement for the temple.
I see.
It was a place for Jews to connect, to pray, but even those Jews would aspire to go up to Jerusalem, to the temple. Now, after the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and fell, well, then the prominence of the synagogue, of the houses of worship, became even more important, because then
Mhm.
it was all we had for a place to connect and to worship. Now, I'll tell you something interesting. In the Hebrew language, a synagogue is called a mikdash me'at, a small sanctuary or a small temple, as opposed to the big temple, which is in Jerusalem. And so many people to this day, especially in the Hebrew language, a synagogue is referred to as mikdash me'at, a small temple. I'll tell you something else that's interesting. It's infrequent that you'll find the reference to a house of worship, a Jewish house of worship, as a temple until more recent times. And that was deliberate, because
In
the
other
word
words,
temple
Yeah.
until recent times was reserved for the temple.
Oh, I see.
And so they called the houses of the Jewish synagogue, they called it synagogue, which was in Greek, or they called it a house of gathering, or a shul, which also means like a room or a school,
But
right?
not
A
a
German
temple.
shul. And so the word temple is a little bit more of a recent title, because Jews for a long time wanted to preserve the word temple to be talking about the big temple in Jerusalem.
Uh-huh. Got it.
And so that's why, if you're wondering why, and again, I'm not, this is not about disrespecting people that do call their places temple, but that's why, like our shul, we call it synagogue, we call it shul, but we don't really use the word temple in a formal sense. And that's not intentionally, but I believe culturally a continuation of that idea that a shul, a synagogue, a house of worship is something different than the temple.
Very good explanation. Yeah.
I'm so happy you asked it, because I might have not given the explanation. And I want to tell you, Lynn, I want to tell you how good of a question it is. It happens to be that just last night, I was listening to a Jewish history podcast randomly. I like to keep myself up to date on different, ideas.
Right.
And they were talking about this very issue. They're talking about this very issue, the development of prayer. And so you're asking a very timely and wise question.
So, all right, I have another question now.
Okay.
If this is true, what you're saying, that the word temple is reserved for the temple in Jerusalem, why do they call some places Temple Shalom, Temple Bethel? They use the word temple, maybe not in Orthodox,
Right.
but maybe in Reform they do it, but they use that word in the title of the temple.
Right. So what I meant, what I was saying, that's why I said until recent times in America, you don't really find the word temple. And it might actually be part,
but in recent times you find it, right?
Recent time, but you are correct. It's more prevalent. I'm not saying it's exclusive. You'll find it more frequently in Reform.
Yeah.
Because in the early days of Reform, there was an attempt to kind of, I want to say this delicately, in the origins of Reform, there wasn't a lot of Zionism. There wasn't a lot of looking towards Israel and Jerusalem and the temple. There was an attempt
Mhm.
initially, because of the political dynamics in Germany and in Europe, to kind of say we're not really aspiring to rebuild the temple. We're not aspiring to go back to Israel. And I suspect there's a possibility that it's around and as a development from those sentiments that the original German Jews who came to America began and continued calling their houses of worship temple. Even though today, thankfully the reform movement, let me just, someone's at the door. One second. Shama. Hi, you missed a good discussion. Let's hear here now. All right, we're joined in studio by Shammai.
Hi.
You can sit here, you can sit over there, wherever you're comfortable. So, I don't know. So I just wanted to say,
Yeah.
that, and that's possibly the origin of the word temple, because in I don't want to use the word, I don't like labels. I don't say Orthodox, but in the older concept, or in the prevailing concept, let's say, in classic traditional Judaism, was an attempt to distinguish and differentiate. This is not the temple. There's the temple that we hope one day will be rebuilt and we'll go back to Israel. And then and conversely, and today this is not really a conscious distinction. I'm just explaining to you how it might have developed. But in those days, there was those that called their houses of worship temple might have been a little more comfortable saying, no, we don't need another temple. This is the temple. And alongside, and it goes alongside with a general debate about Zionism versus, Jewish acclamation into society where we have our temple, we don't need anything else. And again, today, none of those sentiments are, to my knowledge, are at the forefront of this distinction, but it is interesting to explore that.
Right.
And again, today I think you'll find some Orthodox houses of worship that are called temple, but they're still a less prevalent in Orthodoxy. So I'm just going to give a fast recap because Shammai is joining us in the studio. So we told a very fascinating tale, in my opinion, anyways, where the people who were meant to live on the east side of the Jordan, the Reubenites, the Gadites, so they finished helping the Jews settle, and now they go back and they take along with
14 years.
After 14 years, they take a lot of wealth, and they go home, and they start settling, and they start thinking about their future. And so the 22nd chapter of Joshua tells us they built a big altar, and that big altar led to an altercation. The other tribes are nervous that these 2.5 tribes want to create their own spiritual center, and they want to set themselves apart from the Israelites. And most importantly, they were concerned that this is going to bring spiritual vulnerability and divine retribution. And so they were ready to resolve this issue, even by violence if necessary. And so first they send the most able diplomatic emissary, who's Pinchas, and 10 other great wise elders of the Israelites. And they go across and they say, hey, tribes, what's going on? Why do you build this altar? Are you trying to rebel against God? You know, it's not usually it doesn't usually end well when we try to rebel against God. They said, no, this is sincere. Our intention is simply to create something that will testify and be a testament to the enduring connection between the Jewish community on the east and the west side of the Jordan. And we don't want our descendants to ever be disallowed, cut off from the Holy Temple and from the Jewish mainland. And therefore, we're making this just as a sign that the connection endures. Pinchas and the elders accept this explanation, and there's a lot of relief and celebration all around. The 2.5 tribes are pretty glad their explanation is accepted and it was sincere. And the 10 tribes say, thank God we don't have this problem and we don't have to go to battle. We don't have to make trouble. And so the Reubenites and the Gadites name the altar aid, witness. Hebrew, the word aid is witness, because this was to be a witness between the children of Israel on the east side of the Jordan, on the west side of the Jordan, that we share the same God and we have the same rights as Jewish people. And this brings to a close this very interesting, somewhat dramatic chapter in the story of the book of Joshua. Now, folks, we have but 2 chapters. I'm sorry if this gets you dizzy. I got bounced at the beginning. 2 chapters left to the book of Joshua. We're almost done with the book of Joshua, which means that in a week or 2, we're going to start the book of Judges. Let me tell you something. Judges is a high, fast-paced text full of drama, intrigue, violence, miracle, exhilaration, disappointment. It's going to be a lot of fun. So we're just getting started. Let's read a little bit. I know it's already a little bit too late to really start another chapter, but I want to do a little further, if that's okay.
Yep.
Shammai just joined us. I want to get so much later, a long time later, many years later. So we started a new season over here, right?
Mhm.
And so the end of the old season was they all go home. The next season is the drama of the fight, and then they resolve it. Many, many years later, after the Lord has given Israel rest from all its enemies around, Joshua was old, quite old. So Joshua summoned all Israel, their elders, commanders, their magistrates and officials, all the different people on the political chain and the leadership chain. And he tells them, I've grown old and I'm advanced in years.
How old do you think he is now?
I actually saw it somewhere, but I don't recall. So let's take a fast peek. That's a good question you're asking. How old was Joshua? Let's see. Hold on. Lynn, Shammai asked a good question. He stumped the rabbi. He
Right.
wants to know how old
Joshua was.
Joshua was.
70,
Maybe he was 65.
65.
And that's
70.
what Gedalia
Yeah.
says.
But in those days, they had advanced years. They lived longer.
So interestingly enough, at this
Yeah.
point,
Oh, at this point they
seems
didn't.
like the age span, for the most part, was closer to
300.
closer to what we know today.
Oh, okay.
But I'm looking to see if I can find the answer here. Shammai asked a good question. How old was Joshua? You know what? We're going to defer this question till the verse that describes his passing, and then we'll see.
Well, you can Google it too.
You know what? Let's Google it.
Google it.
We're going to Google how old was Joshua. How old was Joshua when he got old?
That's good.
By the way, I just want to say this. Google is certainly not
The best.
Perfect.
the ideal source,
About Chabad.org.
but let's do something here. Let's go to the end. And let's see if the verse tells us. Boom. Here, we just skipped ahead. After the events that we're about to read, Joshua, son of Nun, died at the age of 110
Oh, okay.
years.
Wow.
So he wasn't that young.
So I was right about
He was a little older than we are accustomed to.
110 is a
I
good
have
long
known
life.
more than one person that lived to that age in Hallandale. So,
You know one person, really?
well, she's no longer with us, but she passed recently. She lived in the hemispheres. I think she was 111 or something.
Oh my God. My mother lived to be 101 3/4.
In Ahara.
My grandmother
Yeah.
was 97.
And someone else that just passed away lived till I think 102 or 103. So
Mhm. Yeah.
we're not quite in the biblical. We're not quite biblical yet, but we're getting there. So with God's help, we wish everybody here long, healthy life, long, healthy, and happy life. All right. So Joshua was getting old. So we don't know if maybe he was like 102, getting old.
Maybe.
You know. So he tells them, you've seen all that the Lord your God has done to all the nations for you. It was because the Lord fought for you. See, we've divided the land. I've allotted the land for the tribes. These nations that still remain, all the nations that I've destroyed from the Jordan. You see what's going on. Some tribes are left. Your indigenous populations, some are gone. The Lord yourself will thrust them out of your account and drive them out to make way for you. And you shall possess their land as the Lord promised you. So what Joshua is saying is, although you've been mostly victorious, there are some pockets of opposition that are causing you trouble. If you follow God's instruction, God will take care of them. But be most resolute to observe faithfully all that is written in the book of the teaching of Moses, without ever deviating from it to the right or to the left, without intermingling with those nations that are left among you. What's wrong with intermingling? Do not utter the names of their gods or swear by them. If you have to be civil and integrated with pagan tribes, you're going to have to adopt paganism.
Mm-hmm.
God does not support paganism. Don't serve those idols. Don't bow down to them. Hold fast to the Lord your God, as you have done to this day. The Lord has driven out great, powerful nations on your account, and not a man has withstood you to this day. A single man of you would put 1,000 to flight, for the Lord your God himself has been fighting for you, as he promised you. For your own sakes, therefore, be most mindful to love the Lord your God. Because if you do not, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that God willing we'll read about next week in another chapter in the book of Joshua.
Mm-hmm.
So as we can feel, we're heading towards the end of the book.
Mm-hmm.
No more geography. Now we're talking about internal affairs, spiritual affairs, intertribal matters. And I just want to give you a little spoiler alert. Today's intrigue is not the last time that we'll have intertribal friction, intertribal drama.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot more to look forward to. There's a lot more to get ready for in the coming weeks. I'd like to thank my dear friends, even in the thick of summer, we're still coming around to study,
That's good.
Oh,
Yeah.
learn.
Good stuff.
Wonderful. Lynn, I want to thank you for joining us by phone.
Thank you. And I'm
Internet.
here now, but
Dahlia
thank
Shammai, thank you for being here in
thank
person.
you.
And to all our dear friends, Sheila, Joy, Glenda, everyone else that's not here, and maybe you'll be
Yeah.
joining us on the recording. Thank you for joining us.
Okay, Rabbi, thank you so much. Very interesting. Thank
Have a
you.
wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Have a good day. Bye, everybody. Stay
Bye.
safe.
Bye-bye.